She survived war zones, cartel ambushes, and black ops missions, but nothing prepared Lieutenant Maya Washington for being thrown to the ground, handcuffed, and humiliated on the streets of her own hometown. Her military ID lay crushed beneath a boot. 20 minutes later, the FBI would raid the station, but by then, her nightmare had already begun. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story you won't want to miss. The late afternoon sun spilled gold across the streets of Westridge, Georgia, but the warmth in the light didn't reach Lieutenant Maya Washington. Her hands gripped the steering wheel of the rental car as she turned down a street that used to smell like sweet magnolia and barbecue smoke, now crowded with artisanal cafes, condo developments, and boutique yoga studios. She barely recognized the town that had raised her. On the corner where Benny's barbershop used to be, where she got her first high and tight cut before basic training, stood a wine bar with hanging ferns and a chalkboard menu. The mural that once honored local veterans had faded behind scaffolding and ads for luxury apartments. Maya slowed as she passed, her eyes catching on the peeling paint of her own face in uniform, painted proudly 15 years ago. A part of her had expected time to freeze while she was away. Instead, her hometown had shed its soul like an old coat and slipped into something unfamiliar. A flash in the rearview mirror, brake lights. Maya exhaled and tried to focus on the road, but her thoughts drifted. She saw dust storms in Kandahar, remembered the sounds of rotor blades and radio chatter, the adrenaline of intelligence briefings in makeshift tents. Her mind flipped through images like pages, surveillance photos from Venezuela, late nights spent tracking cartel routes, and the heavy silence after field missions when the intel hit too close to home. But this silence in Westridge was different, not the calm of peace, more like the stillness before a storm. Maya turned down Sycamore Street, then into the gravel driveway of her childhood home. The house had sagged some, just like her mother's shoulders. It was a single-story structure with chipped paint, crooked shutters, and a front porch that creaked when you breathed too hard. But the American flag still hung beside the front door. Her mother had never taken it down. Not once, not even when Maya was deployed for years at a time. The cloth was faded now, edges fraying, but it flew like it had something left to prove. The screen door opened slowly, and there she was, Elaine Washington, standing with the help of a worn metal walker, a floral apron draped over her front like always. "Well," Elaine said, smiling as tears pooled in her tired eyes. "You took long enough." Maya stepped out of the car and moved quickly, wrapping her arms around her mother before the older woman could protest. Elaine smelled like lavender lotion and cornbread, like home. Maya buried her face in her mother's shoulder. "I missed you, Mama," she whispered. Elaine grunted softly, "You better have." The evening was filled with quiet laughter and the clinking of plates as Maya helped her mother finish dinner and set up her medication for the week. They sat at the kitchen table as the sky darkened, swapping stories, some military, some hometown gossip, some unspoken things tucked between spoonfuls of okra and rice. Elaine's body had grown frail, but her voice still carried the steel Maya had inherited. "I had no idea Westridge had changed so much," Maya said, peering out the window at the gentrified streetlights. "It feels hollow." Elaine gave a tired nod. "It changed fast, too fast. All those new developments weren't built for us, baby. They were built on top of us." Maya looked down at her mother's shaking hands. "I'm staying this time," she said gently. "No more deployments. I've got one foot out of the military door already." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "You mean it?" Maya nodded. "I came home for you. I'm not going anywhere." Later that night, Maya found an old grocery list pinned to the fridge. Half the items were already in the pantry. "I'll go get the rest in the morning," she told her mom. "Don't you worry about it." The next day, Maya woke early, laced her boots, and grabbed the keys to the rental. She had barely made it 5 blocks from her mother's house when she noticed the cruiser in the rearview mirror. It was riding low, slow, staying just far enough back to seem coincidental. She changed lanes. It followed. She made an unnecessary left turn, still there. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. A memory from her last visit to Georgia rose like bile. The time she was pulled over outside Savannah for driving too cautiously. The officer had chuckled when she showed her military ID, calling her another one of those special ones. That chuckle had haunted her ever since. Now her heart beat steadily, but her jaw clenched as the cruiser's blue lights flashed behind her. She eased to the curb on 14th Street, parking beside a row of tidy hedges that lined a dentist's office. Before the officer even stepped out, she had both her driver's license and military ID in hand. She exhaled once, slow and controlled, like before a sniper shot. The car door opened. Boots hit the pavement. And then she saw him. White male, late 30s, mirrored sunglasses, thick forearms, and a smug tilt to his chin. His nameplate read, B. Cooper. License and registration, he barked without greeting, hand resting on his holstered sidearm. Maya handed over both documents calmly. Yes, officer. Is there a reason I was stopped? He snatched the papers from her hand and scanned them lazily. His lip curled when he saw the military ID. Broken tail light, he muttered. I rented this car yesterday, Maya replied. I'm confident the lights were in perfect condition. Are you refusing to comply with an officer's directive? His voice had changed, sharper, louder. No, Maya said, keeping her voice even. I'm only clarifying. Behind him, another officer stood beside the patrol car, young, nervous. Nameplate said Miller. His body language was tense, uncertain. Maya felt her stomach drop. I'm going to step out of the vehicle, Maya announced, her voice firm but non-threatening. I'd like to call my attorney if that's all right. She reached slowly for her phone, moving like she'd practiced 1,000 times during high-risk detainment training. Calm, predictable, visible hands. But the moment her fingers touched the phone, Cooper struck. With one fast motion, he slapped the phone from her hand. It clattered to the asphalt, screen cracking on impact. Resisting arrest and reaching for a weapon, he shouted as he grabbed her wrist and yanked her violently from the car. Maya's body slammed against the hood. Pain shot through her shoulder, but her instincts screamed louder, do not retaliate. She could disable him in seconds. She had done worse to trained combatants in war zones. But this wasn't a battlefield. Not yet. Handcuffs snapped around her wrists. Too tight. Cooper leaned in close, breath thick with arrogance. People like you think you're above the law, he hissed. Your little medals don't mean jack around here. Maya clenched her jaw but said nothing. Across the street, a few neighbors had come out of their homes. Phones were recording. One woman, a black elder Maya recognized from childhood Sundays, watched, hand over her mouth. As Maya was pushed toward the patrol car, Cooper pulled a small plastic bag from his pocket. Look what I found under her seat, he said, holding it up like a trophy. The younger officer, Miller, hesitated. His jaw tightened. He looked at the bag, then at Maya, then away. This is a mistake, Maya said clearly, for the cameras, for the neighbors, for whatever audio might survive this moment. I've served my country for 20 years. I don't use drugs. I don't resist arrest. And this is a setup. Cooper forced her into the back seat, slamming the door behind her. She caught one last glimpse of the street before the door closed. Her military photo had slipped from her wallet during the struggle. It now lay face up on the pavement. Her in full dress uniform, ribbons and medals aligned across her chest, the American flag behind her. Cooper stepped on it, not by accident. His boot twisted against the photo, grinding it into the concrete. Maya looked down at her cuffed hands, blood trickling from her lip where it had split against the hood. She closed her eyes, breathed deep, and whispered just loud enough for herself to hear. Hold the line. The Westridge police station loomed like a cold, windowless box as the patrol car pulled into the rear lot. Maya sat cuffed in the back seat, her lip throbbing, wrists raw, trying to focus on the rhythm of her breath. Inhale, exhale, focus. Don't give them more than they already took. The back entrance buzzed open with a harsh metallic groan. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting the hallway in sickly yellow hues. The floor reeked of bleach and old coffee, a sterile attempt at control that couldn't hide the rot beneath. Cooper yanked the door open and pulled Maya out with deliberate force. Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself before he could take satisfaction in seeing her fall. As they passed through the first security checkpoint, the metal detector beeped automatically, though she wore no metal. Cooper ignored it, muttering to the desk sergeant, "Got a live one." Sergeant Frank Porter didn't look up from his computer. He had a gut that strained against his uniform shirt and thinning gray hair plastered to his scalp. His eyes flicked up just once as Cooper pushed Maya forward, then returned to the glowing screen. "Name," he grunted. "Lieutenant Maya Washington, United States Army." Porter snorted. "Well, not in here, you not." His fingers moved sluggishly across the keyboard. "Here, you're just another perp." Maya stood straight, not because she expected dignity, but because she refused to give it away. Cooper leaned close behind her and deliberately tightened her cuffs until the metal bit into her skin. She winced, jaw clenching. "You don't get special treatment," he whispered. Maya didn't flinch. "Never asked for it." She glanced at the corner of the room, where a red recording light should have been blinking on the security camera mounted above the door. It was off. She clocked that detail, stored it away. Everything here was happening in shadows. Porter rolled his eyes. "Any prior arrests?" "No," Maya said evenly. "I've served for 2 decades. 3 deployments. No arrests." Porter didn't even pretend to care. "You got priors now." Cooper chuckled. "Found something under the seat, too. She forgot to mention that." The baggie of planted drugs reappeared, dangled in front of Maya's face like bait. "You know that's not mine," she said, voice steady. Cooper smirked. "Sure, it just walked into your rental car all on its own." Another officer passed by in the hallway, glanced in and quickly looked away. Maya's breath deepened. She wasn't afraid, she was taking stock, and what she saw was worse than she imagined. This wasn't about one bad cop. It was a culture. Footsteps echoed across the concrete floor. Maya looked up to see a tall man in an immaculate uniform walking toward her with practiced authority. Silver hair, gold badge, polished shoes. The name tag said Chief W. Brooks. He stopped in front of her, hands behind his back, expression unreadable. Cooper straightened, suddenly respectful. "What's the situation here, Cooper?" Brooks asked, eyes sliding from the drugs to Maya's bruised face. "Resisting arrest, reaching for a weapon. I also found this in her car." Cooper held up the bag. Maya met the chief's eyes directly. "That's a lie. Those were planted, and I was assaulted after requesting legal counsel." Brooks stared at her for a long moment. "You got any proof?" She nodded toward the street. "There were witnesses, cameras." "Of course there were," he said flatly. He stepped forward, so close she could smell his cologne. "Let me explain something, Lieutenant," he said, the word twisted with disdain. "Your uniform doesn't give you immunity. Your medals don't mean anything here. You're in my house now." Maya didn't blink. "Then I'll expect your house to follow the law." Brooks smiled coldly. "We do. Just not the version you're used to." He turned to Cooper. "Processor, put her in holding." As Cooper grabbed her arm again, Maya looked up at the camera. Still no red light. Still dark. Still silent. The halls they walked through were long and narrow, lined with offices and interrogation rooms. Several doors were closed, others slightly ajar, revealing officers chatting over coffee or watching sports clips on their computers. No one looked her in the eye. No one asked questions. The holding cell door buzzed and Cooper pushed her inside. It was a small room with a concrete bench, a stained toilet, and 4 other detainees. The walls were painted cinder-block gray, chipped in places. The air smelled like bleach and sweat. Every sound echoed. The cuffs came off with a sharp twist that made her wrists sting. Cooper smiled down at her, then leaned in low. "Enjoy your new accommodations, Lieutenant." Then he left. The door slammed behind her. A moment passed before one of the men in the cell, older, black, gray in his beard, shifted on the bench to make room. "I'm Jerome," he said quietly. "You can sit here if you like." Maya nodded. She sat. Her body was aching, but her mind was sharper than ever. A younger man in the corner looked up. "Wait, are you Maya Washington?" She blinked. "How do you know that?" "You got that medal," he said. "Hostage rescue in Syria. They did a story on you. My cousin posted it. Said you were the real deal." Maya let out a breath. "They mess with the wrong person today," the young man added. "Name's Jamal." Maya looked around the cell and realized she wasn't the only one with a story. Over the next 20 minutes, they shared their experiences. One had been arrested for walking home after dark. Another said he was detained for loitering outside a convenience store he had just bought groceries from. The stories bled into each other, overlapping like bricks in a wall. Harassment, charges that didn't stick, evidence that conveniently appeared. Jerome shook his head slowly. It's been this way for years, but when Brooks took over, it got organized, systemic, quiet. They started getting smart. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the cell. She leaned back, let her eyes close for a second, and her mind wandered to Venezuela, one of her last assignments. She'd been tasked with analyzing financial patterns in cartel money laundering operations. Some of it had disappeared into shell companies based in the States. She remembered telling her superior, Colonel Hernandez, that something didn't add up, that some of the money was going to small-town departments way off the radar. Departments like this one. She opened her eyes again and looked around the holding cell. No one was coming. Not yet. The metal flap in the door opened with a clink. A paper cup of water slid through, and Officer Miller's face appeared briefly in the narrow window. "Thanks," Maya said softly. He gave the faintest nod, then disappeared again. Jerome leaned in closer. "That one?" he said. "I don't think he's fully bought in. He looks nervous." Maya nodded. "I saw it too." She scanned the room again. The camera above the door was also dark. Another detail, another red flag. Whatever this was, it was layered, rehearsed, and protected. She shifted her position slightly and adjusted her sleeves, revealing the angry red marks around her wrists. She studied the layout, the exits, the officers she passed earlier. How many were likely in on it? How many were silent because they were scared? The door buzzed again. Cooper walked past the window, glanced in, smirked. Then, as if he couldn't help himself, he opened the door halfway. "Chief wants a private word later," he said quietly. He didn't wait for a reply. The door clicked shut. Maya felt every eye in the cell turn to her. Jerome stared at her with sudden seriousness. "You ever heard what happens when someone in here gets taken for a private word?" he asked. She held his gaze. He didn't smile. "That's when people vanished." Maya said nothing, but her pulse quickened. She had made it through war zones, secret prisons, diplomatic breakdowns. And now, the greatest threat to her life was in a small-town police station, shielded by silence. She folded her hands, lowered her head, and began to run through tactical responses, not in case something happened, but because it already was. The morning haze clung to the skyline of Atlanta as Agent Darius Reynolds stood motionless before a corkboard littered with maps, red threads, and grainy surveillance photos. The air in his FBI office was tense, the kind of silence that came before a storm. Most agents had gone home, but Reynolds, a former Marine turned lead federal investigator on corruption cases, never left anything unfinished, especially not this one. His eyes scanned over the pinned image of a cash-stuffed duffel bag in the back of a patrol car in El Paso. Another photo showed a map of rural Georgia towns marked in red. Beside them, a blurry courthouse ledger with names he had spent months trying to decrypt. One of them had just resurfaced. Unexpectedly, violently. His burner phone buzzed on the desk behind him. He turned, checked the ID, and immediately answered. "Tasha," he said. On the other end, Tasha Jones' voice was sharp, clipped with urgency. "They took her. Last night. Westridge PD. No charges listed in the system. She called me during the stop, but the line went dead." Darius stood straighter. "You're saying they arrested Maya?" "Yes, Maya Washington. They drugged her out of the car. Cooper was the arresting officer. No body cam, no call logs. Her car's impounded." "Darius, they're burying it." Reynolds' jaw clenched. He didn't ask how Tasha knew so much. He knew her well enough to trust it was solid. "Westridge," he repeated under his breath, turning back to the wall. "Of all the damn places." There was a pause. Then Tasha added, "Her mother called me. She was supposed to come home for good." Darius swallowed hard. That wasn't just a name on the wall anymore. Maya wasn't a distant witness or a person of interest. She was one of theirs. One of his. She had once pulled him out of an ambush in Caracas when everything went sideways. He owed her his life. Now she needed someone to return the favor. "I'm coming in," he said, already grabbing his jacket. Within the hour, the small operations room lit up. Agent Samantha Chen, sharp-nosed and younger but already a trusted partner, slid into the seat beside Reynolds. "We got something," she said. "I pulled her personnel record. Lieutenant Maya Washington, highly decorated, multilingual, 4 deployments, last operation classified. But look at this." She tapped the screen, pulling up a satellite image of a village in southern Venezuela. "Maya was involved in Operation Ibis," Chen continued. "We never made it public, but her team intercepted a financial courier connected to the Marquez cartel. That courier had ledgers that linked cartel funds to several U.S. bank accounts and shell corporations." Darius's brow furrowed. "You're saying domestic laundering?" "Small-town departments, mostly in the South. Rural PDs used as pass-throughs. We flagged Westridge PD as low priority because there wasn't enough evidence, until now." He leaned in, tension tightening his voice. "So Maya gets arrested in a town we already suspected of laundering cartel money, and no one bothers to report it? No charges filed, no press." "It's a blackout," Chen said. "And if it's Cooper and Brooks, then we're not just dealing with bad cops, we're dealing with an internal network." Daria didn't hesitate. "We go to Alvarez, now." Minutes later, inside the DOJ satellite office downtown, Assistant Director Carlos Alvarez stood stiff behind his desk as Darius and Chen laid everything out. Photos, timelines, audio logs. The map with Westridge now circled in red. "She's the keystone," Reynolds said. "Maya's not just a decorated officer. She's the last person who held the Venezuela accounts in her head. If she's off the grid, it's because they know who she is." Alvarez frowned. "You think they made her?" Chen nodded. "Cooper didn't just arrest her, he assaulted her. We believe they planted drugs. We believe Chief Brooks is involved. We also believe they may attempt to move her." Alvarez held up a hand. "What do you want?" "Emergency raid authorization," Reynolds said without blinking. "We go in tonight. Tactical team, full clearance. We don't let her vanish." Alvarez was quiet for a moment. Then he moved to his drawer and pulled out a sealed file. "You realize if you're wrong." "I'm not." Alvarez stared at Reynolds for a long beat, then slowly nodded. "Fine. You have clearance. Bring her back." Back in the operations room, the hum of printers and radios filled the air. Surveillance feeds popped to life, drones rerouted. Reynolds stood beside the central map again. This time, Maya's photo was pinned dead center. Her official portrait from deployment, uniform crisp, eyes unwavering. He touched the edge of the photo and whispered, "Let's bring her home." In a darkened corner of the Westridge Police Department, Officer Miller slipped into the break room under the hum of flickering fluorescent lights. He pulled out his encrypted burner phone, eyes darting to the hallway. With trembling fingers, he typed a short message using a code drilled into him months earlier by an old academy friend who now worked quietly with the FBI. Target in holding, drugs planted, moving soon. He hit send, heart pounding, then slid the phone back into the coffee can hidden under stale filters. The message would disappear in 60 seconds. He counted each one. Back in Atlanta, the FBI surveillance team flagged the incoming ping. Chen's computer lit up. "That's it," she said. "Confirmation." Darius Reynolds leaned in. "What's the timestamp?" 4 minutes ago. They're moving her. Off-site, no paper trail. Darius didn't wait. Go. Within seconds, red lights flashed in the briefing room. Tactical agents donned body armor and checked their weapons. 2 armored Suburbans roared to life in the underground garage. Darius clipped a comm into his ear and secured a folder under his arm, one labeled Operation Fall Point. On the command board behind him, Maya's image now glowed beside a second photo, Chief Harold Brooks, and under that, a spiderweb of bank accounts, aliases, real estate holdings, and unexplained payments, all tied to cartel laundering routes. They finally had enough, and time was running out. The sound of bootsteps echoed across the concrete floor of the Westridge PD basement. Maya's hands were still cuffed, her shoulders stiff, back straight. Every movement she made was deliberate now, tactical. She had shifted from civilian fatigue into something deeper, military instinct. Her breath was steady, her gaze fixed ahead. She knew they were about to move her. The question was why and to where. Behind her, Jerome's voice was low but firm. "They don't bring you out this early unless it's bad." She turned her head slightly. "How bad?" Jerome looked toward the barred door, then back at her. "Depends how loud you scream." Cooper appeared at the end of the hallway, chewing gum like he owned the earth beneath his boots. His swagger hadn't changed, but the sweat on his brow betrayed something deeper, nervous energy. He hated how composed she was. It made him feel smaller. He wanted her afraid, and she wouldn't give it to him. "Time for a little chat," he muttered, unlocking the cell. As Maya was escorted down the hallway, she took mental snapshots. 2 exits, 1 camera pointed deliberately away from the corridor, a side door she hadn't noticed before. She noted the shifts in the officers' eyes, the stiffness in their bodies. Something was off. Cooper shoved open a side door and pushed her into a small, windowless interrogation room. The walls were stained yellow from years of neglect. The camera in the corner was unplugged. Chief Brooks was already waiting. He didn't rise when she entered. He didn't even speak at first. He just stared, as if sizing her up. Then, with slow, calculated movement, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a manila folder. He opened it, letting its contents spill onto the table. Photos, satellite maps, 1 document with her name on it, redacted, except for the signature at the bottom, classified. Maya didn't flinch. Brooks leaned forward, his voice low. "See, we've been watching you for a long time, Lieutenant. You think your military stripes mean something here?" He tapped 1 photo, an aerial shot of a village in Venezuela, one Maya knew all too well. "You stumbled into something. And the people funding this town's new courthouse? They don't like loose ends." Maya's lips tightened. "Then they should have killed me when they had the chance." Brooks leaned back, cold smile spreading. "That's the thing, soldier. We still might." The hallway stretched in front of Maya like a tunnel, dimly lit and closing in. Officer Cooper walked behind her, close enough for his breath to brush the back of her neck. His grip on her arm was firm, controlling. Each step echoed with sharp authority on the scuffed linoleum floor. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You really think someone's coming for you?" he sneered. "You think that fancy title, lieutenant or whatever, means anything here? Out here, You're just another mouthy civilian." Maya didn't answer. Her jaw clenched. She felt every bruise, every ache from the assault earlier, but inside her pulse remained steady, controlled, focused. She wasn't scared. Not anymore. Behind them, Officer Miller trailed several paces back. He kept glancing at his watch, then to the emergency exit at the end of the corridor, then back to his watch. Something in his demeanor was twitchy, off. He cleared his throat, walking slower, deliberately lagging behind Cooper and Maya. "Hey, Cooper," Miller called, his tone forced casual. "You sure the chief wants her in interrogation 3? That room's got a broken camera. We should—" "I said interrogation 3, Cooper snapped. "She won't be there long." Miller nodded but didn't speed up. His eyes flicked to the hallway camera. The light was off, disabled, just like the rest of them. Maya's military senses kicked in. Something in Miller's rhythm felt like a pattern, like a code. She noticed how he shifted his body at each junction, how his hand briefly brushed the base of his radio, and how his eyes paused exactly on the red exit light. He was marking the room, mapping the exits, stalling. She didn't know who Miller really was yet, but she knew one thing. He was buying time. Then everything went black. The overhead lights cut out in an instant. The hum of electricity silenced. Emergency red lights blinked on, one by one, casting a pulsing crimson glow through the corridor. Cooper froze. What the hell? Maya pivoted, shifted her weight, and in a single movement drilled into her by years of training, she threw her shoulder back into Cooper's chest. He stumbled, arms flailing. She dropped to one knee, spun, and used his own momentum to send him crashing into the wall. Cooper cursed, reaching for his baton, but it was too late. The door at the end of the hallway exploded inward. Boots thundered in. Voices shouted in command. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." The entire station shook with the force of the breach. Boots pounded against tile, weapons drawn, bodies moving in unison with tactical precision. The shouts were loud but controlled. "Clear left, stairwell secured, move." Cooper staggered up from the floor, dazed, trying to grab for Maya again, but she was already moving. She ducked behind the wall as two agents in full tactical gear stormed the corridor. One of them trained a rifle directly on Cooper. "Hands, show us your hands." Cooper raised them slowly, blinking in confusion. "What the hell is this?" he barked. "You've got no jurisdiction here." One of the agents stepped forward, lowering his weapon just slightly. "We do now. Step back." Cooper's mouth opened to argue, but Maya saw it. His hand twitched toward the baton at his hip. She shouted, "He's reaching!" The agents didn't hesitate. Cooper was slammed to the ground in seconds, his face hitting the tile with a sickening crack. Zip ties went around his wrists before he could shout another word. Down the hall, Miller pressed himself to the wall, out of the way, hands raised high. One of the agents gave him a curt nod. "Undercover," Miller muttered. "State police, been 6 months?" The agent acknowledged him with a silent glance, then kept moving. Maya backed up against the wall, breathing heavily, still cuffed, heart pounding. Then she saw him. Agent Reynolds emerged from the shadows, walking straight toward her. His face was a mix of urgency and guilt. "We should have been faster," he said, voice low. Maya didn't say anything. Her wrists were raw and bleeding. Reynolds gently unclipped the cuffs. Her arms fell free. She took a breath. Then she looked him in the eye and said, "Then let's finish what they started." Chief Brooks stood at the far end of the second floor, red emergency lights flashing across his polished nameplate. His office was already in disarray. Papers scattered, drawers yanked open, a shredder humming as he tried to force thick folders into its throat. Come on," he growled under his breath, sweat streaking down his temple. A laptop blinked on his desk, cursor frozen mid-delict. A hard drive clattered to the floor as he kicked the drawer shut. That's when the door slammed open. Agent Darius Reynolds entered first, weapon drawn but low, eyes scanning everything. Behind him, two more agents poured in, rifles leveled. Brooks froze, still holding a file in one hand. "You're making a mistake," Brooks said quietly, trying to keep his voice even. Reynolds stepped closer and handed the paper in his hand to the nearest officer. "Federal warrant, obstruction, conspiracy, tampering with evidence, civil rights violations, and aiding a known money-laundering enterprise." Brooks's face drained of all color. "You don't know what you're doing. You don't know who I work with." "We know exactly who you work with," Reynolds replied, "and they're next." The agent surrounded him, pulling his arms behind his back. The folder he had clutched slipped from his grip, papers fluttering to the floor. One page landed face up. It was Maya's mugshot. Reynolds glanced at it, then at Brooks. "You messed with the wrong Marine." As they zip-tied the cuffs and led him out, Brooks passed by the interrogation room. Through the open door, he saw Maya, still bruised, still standing. Their eyes locked for a split second. And in that moment, Brooks looked not like a man in charge, but a man who had finally realized his empire had fallen. Cooper shoved open the hallway door, ignoring the chaos behind him. The sounds of shouting agents and splintering doors faded as his boots echoed down the concrete corridor toward the evidence room. His breathing was ragged, wild eyes darting between door signs and emergency lights. He knew if he could just get to the lockers, just one more minute, he could destroy what little remained. The backup ledger, the surveillance USB, the hard bag with cartel cash still untagged. One spark, one lighter, and the rest would burn. He reached for his side holster, fumbling with the keycard to swipe in. But as he turned the corner, someone was already waiting. Agent Samantha Chen didn't hesitate. She lunged from her position against the wall, tackling Cooper with clean, practiced force. They slammed into the floor, hard. Cooper tried to twist away, his arm snaking toward his taser. Chen caught it mid-motion, driving her elbow into his wrist until he screamed and released it. Blood from a small gash on his forehead smeared the concrete. "Federal agent," she barked as two more agents closed in. Cooper thrashed like a dying animal. "You don't know what you're doing. You think this is about me?" Chen flipped him on his stomach and zip-tied his wrists with brutal efficiency. "Oh, we know exactly who you are, and we know who you've been protecting." Just then, Officer Miller walked up, calm and unflinching, holding a black badge wallet. "I'd like to do the honors," he said coolly, flashing the emblem. "Wait." Cooper's voice broke. "Your state?" Miller nodded, crouching beside him. 6 months, undercover. You never even looked twice." Cooper looked up at him, stunned as realization dawned across his face. "You set me up." "No," Miller replied. "You set yourself up. I just made sure someone was watching." As Cooper was hauled to his feet, Chen retrieved a single key from his belt, a master key to the evidence room. She held it up like a trophy, turned to Miller, and said, "Let's see what ghosts he's been hiding." And behind them, the door to a decade of buried crime stood waiting. Maya stood inside the repurposed operations room, now buzzing with agents in FBI jackets, laptops humming, radios crackling. The once sterile walls of the Westridge Police Department were now plastered with maps, photos, and charts. It had been just over an hour since the raid, but already the transformation was undeniable. The scent of scorched wires and adrenaline still clung to the air. But there was something else now. Control. Reynolds motioned Maya over to a cleared desk covered with folders and a laptop streaming encrypted files. He handed her a bottle of water and gestured to the chair, but Maya remained standing, her eyes already scanning the screen. "We've got digital records," he began, "plus evidence Miller gathered during his undercover months, but it's your field reports from Venezuela that cracked the pattern wide open." Maya blinked. "Venezuela?" Agent Samantha Chen leaned over and tapped the laptop. "You flagged unusual offshore account patterns linked to mid-level cartel members. Those same names started popping up here in Westridge. laundered through police departments, court clerks, even civic redevelopment funds. Maya inhaled sharply. The community programs. Fronts, Reynolds nodded. Fake grants, inflated invoices, shell corporations, everything sanitized through municipal funds and real estate development. Maya's stomach turned. And they used the uniforms to enforce silence. Not just silence, Chen said. Fear. Arrest records were fabricated, property seizures used as leverage. You weren't just arrested because Cooper saw a black woman with power. You were a threat to the entire network. Maya's jaw clenched. So that's why they moved so fast. They thought if they buried me quickly enough, they could bury the evidence too. Reynolds pointed to a series of color-coded lines on a large whiteboard. Your detention triggered the DOJ's emergency protocols, but more importantly, it confirmed what we suspected. This isn't just a few bad cops. It's a structured syndicate with embedded state protection. Maya folded her arms. And you think it started here? Chen hesitated. We think it flows through here. Westridge was the control node. Cartel money came in, donations were dispersed to surrounding departments and political offices, and when someone got curious, they disappeared. Maya thought of Jerome, Jamal, the cold weight of her own handcuffs. So this town, my hometown, was the epicenter. Reynolds looked her in the eye. Yes, and now that you're free, they won't be able to hide anymore. Maya stepped closer to the board, her eyes sweeping over names and photos. Judges, clerks, state reps, even a former mayor. One face in particular stopped her cold. A woman she remembered from her mother's church, now labeled as a key conduit between the district attorney's office and a private contracting firm laundering assets. She whispered, "This wasn't corruption, it was a syndicate." Reynolds nodded solemnly. "And thanks to you, we're finally naming it." Maya's voice tightened. "Then let's dismantle every last piece." Reynolds cracked a faint smile. "We were hoping you'd say that." The holding cell buzzed as the door unlocked one final time. Jerome stood slowly, his joints stiff from the hours on the hard concrete bench. Beside him, Jamal's eyes lit up when he spotted Maya standing free, her wrists no longer bound. An FBI agent motioned for them to step out, his voice calm but firm. "You're free to go. Charges vacated. You'll be debriefed, but you're no longer detainees." Jamal let out a laugh, short but triumphant. "Knew it! I told you they picked the wrong vet to mess with." He clapped Maya on the shoulder, not too hard, but with enough weight to say what words couldn't. Relief, respect, gratitude. Jerome didn't laugh. He studied Maya for a long moment, his eyes narrowing with both sorrow and admiration. "You standing here," he said quietly, "it means something. For all of us they tried to break." Maya nodded, her throat tight. "I won't let their stories die in here. Not yours, not anyone's." One by one, the other detainees filed out into the hall. Some of them had tears in their eyes, others wore expressions of grim vindication. Beyond the glass door at the end of the corridor, light spilled in from the lobby windows, and outside, voices. A gathering crowd. When they emerged, the scene stunned them. Dozens of community members had assembled spontaneously, drawn by the flashing lights of FBI vehicles and the news spreading through town. Mothers, shopkeepers, high school students, veterans, all standing together. Some held cell phones high to record. Others just stared in silence as the detainees walked out. Jamal raised his hands in victory, shouting, "They can't hide it anymore!" A ripple of cheers followed. Maya caught sight of Mrs. Patterson, her old Sunday school teacher, standing at the front of the crowd. Tears streaked her face as she whispered, "Thank you, child." The moment felt fragile, yet powerful, like the first crack of dawn after a long storm. For years, the people of Westridge had whispered about injustice. Now they saw proof it could be confronted. Inside, the agents worked furiously, cataloging evidence. But for the first time that day, Maya let herself breathe. Justice wasn't won, not yet, but it was no longer silent. The interrogation room smelled of sweat and stale air. Cooper sat hunched in the metal chair, wrists zip-tied, jaw swollen from where Chen had taken him down. His sunglasses were gone, his uniform shirt wrinkled and damp. For the first time, his arrogance looked strained, but the defiance hadn't left his eyes. Agent Reynolds entered, closing the door behind him with a deliberate click. He set a folder on the table and slid into the chair opposite Cooper. "You've got one chance," Reynolds said evenly. "Tell us what you know about Brooks' operation, about the accounts, about the cartel link." Cooper laughed, a low, guttural sound. "You think I'm scared of you? I've been running this county for 10 years. You're late to the game." Reynolds opened the folder, spreading photographs across the table. Images of bank records, seized cash, falsified arrest reports. "Late? Looks to me like we've caught up just fine." Cooper's lip curled, but his eyes flickered when he saw the documents. "Paper doesn't scare me. You don't know how far this goes." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You pull one thread, you'll find names you can't touch, judges, senators, men who can make or break your whole career with a phone call." Reynolds didn't blink. "We've already pulled more than one thread. And those names? They're already under review." Cooper slammed his bound fists against the table, the sound echoing through the thin walls. "You don't get it. People like me, we're protected. You arrest me, another takes my place. You can't win this fight." Reynolds gathered the photos, unfazed. "We don't need to win it today, we just need to start. And you've already lost." Cooper smirked, settling back into his chair, his voice laced with menace. "You'll regret this. Everyone in this town will." Through the glass window, Maya watched silently, her fists tightening at her sides. His threats weren't empty bravado. They were warnings. But instead of fear, she felt something steadier: resolve. The mask of invincibility was cracking, and for the first time, the corruption had a face pinned down under federal light. The corridor outside the interrogation rooms erupted with shouts. Agents rushed toward Chief Brooks's office, where the disgraced police chief sat slumped over his desk, his face ghostly pale, sweat soaking through his pressed uniform. The shredder beside him was still jammed with half-chewed documents. "Call medics," one agent barked. Brooks clutched his chest, gasping, his lips trembling as he tried to form words. 2 paramedics arrived within minutes, strapping him to a gurney, fitting an oxygen mask over his face. His eyes darted wildly as they wheeled him past the command center. Maya stood near the doorway, watching as Brooks' gaze met hers. For a heartbeat, his usual arrogance flickered back. Then it was gone, replaced by raw fear. Chen crossed her arms. "Standard delay tactic," she muttered, "or cover for an escape attempt. Either way, he'll be under guard." Reynolds nodded grimly. "If this is real, he'll answer to the charges from a hospital bed. If it's fake, he won't get far. Either way, he's finished." Maya exhaled slowly, her wrists still aching from the cuffs. "Then let's make sure his network is finished too." The fight was far from over, but for the first time, the tide had turned. The smell of smoke lingered in the air long after the fire trucks had pulled away. Tasha stood outside what was left of her small downtown office, her face lit by the red glow of embers still smoldering. The law books she'd collected since her first year in practice had been reduced to ash. Fragments of charred paper floated into the night sky, vanishing against the stars. "They firebombed it," she said flatly, as if speaking it aloud might make it easier to accept. Broad daylight, no warning, her voice cracked, but her eyes burned with quiet fury. Maya stood beside her, jaw tightening as she took in the destruction. "This isn't random," she said. "They're sending a message." Chen stepped forward, scanning the crowd of onlookers and local police who stood awkwardly at the perimeter. "It's more than a message," she said. "It's retaliation. They want fear back in control." Hours later, as Maya drove toward her childhood home, the headlights caught something that twisted her stomach. Red spray paint scrawled across the siding in dripping letters. Race traitor. Her fists tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. Her mother, Elaine, stood on the porch, her walker beside her, trying to scrub the hateful words with a rag and bucket. The image tore through Maya like a blade. She jumped out of the car, rushing to her mother's side. "Mama, stop! Don't touch it!" Elaine's eyes shimmered with tears, but her voice was firm. "They think this will shame us, but it only shows they're scared." Before Maya could respond, her phone buzzed violently. Jamal's name flashed across the screen. She answered quickly, but it wasn't his voice. It was his grandmother's, breathless and panicked. "They jumped him! 3 boys! Outside my house! He's bleeding!" "Maya, he's bleeding." Maya closed her eyes for half a second, swallowing her anger, then spoke with deadly calm. "We're coming." Within the hour, she and Reynolds were at the small house on the east side. Jamal sat on the stoop, his face swollen, lip split, blood staining his shirt. He still managed to smirk when he saw Maya approach. "Guess they didn't like me telling the truth," he muttered. Maya knelt beside him, checking the cut over his brow. "They picked the wrong target," she said softly. Jamal winced as Reynolds handed him a bandage. "No," he replied, his voice raspy but steady. "They picked the wrong vet to mess with. That's the real mistake." Maya looked into his eyes, and despite the pain, she saw the same fire she carried in her own chest. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was resistance. The safe house was a modest ranch-style building tucked away 30 miles outside Westridge, hidden behind rows of pine trees and a long gravel driveway. Its plain exterior gave nothing away, but inside the walls hummed with tension. Federal agents moved in and out, checking locks, adjusting surveillance cameras, and ensuring every angle of the property was secured. Maya stood at the kitchen counter, pouring tea into a mug for her mother. Elaine sat at the small wooden table, her walker leaning against it, the faint smell of lavender following her as always. She tried to appear calm, but Maya caught the tremor in her hands. "They think paint on a house will scare us," Elaine said finally, breaking the silence. "I lived through worse in the 60s, but this feels different. They're organized, baby. You can see it." Maya nodded grimly. She had seen insurgent groups overseas, cells that operated in secrecy until the right moment. The pattern here was too familiar to dismiss. Agent Chen entered carrying a slim laptop, her face pale under the glow of the screen. "We intercepted chatter from encrypted militia channels," she said, placing the laptop on the table. "They're planning coordinated retaliation, and you're the centerpiece, Maya." Maya leaned over the laptop. Dozens of messages scrolled across the screen, most written in crude language. Her name appeared again and again, surrounded by threats. Some were vague promises of revenge, but others were specific. Photos of her childhood home, mentions of the safe house, even distorted snapshots of her mother. Elaine gasped softly, reaching for Maya's hand. "They know where we are?" "No," Chen said quickly. "These images were taken before relocation. They're guessing, but the intent is clear." She scrolled further, highlighting a line that froze the room. "Make the vet an example. Silence her, and the rest will fall in line." Reynolds appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, jaw tight. "We've dealt with militias like this before. They thrive on intimidation. But with Brooks down and Cooper in custody, these fringe elements see an opportunity to rise. They're desperate." Maya straightened, her voice steady. "Desperate men are dangerous men." Shen nodded. "That's why we've doubled surveillance, rotated shifts. No one comes in or out without clearance. But you should know, they're not just talking about you. They've got their sights on anyone connected. Jamal, Jerome, Tasha." The words weighed heavily. Maya looked at her mother, then back at Reynolds. "We can't just hide and wait. We need to push back. Show them this isn't the same Westridge they've controlled for years." Reynolds shook his head. careful, Lieutenant. Right now, our job is to keep you breathing. If they take you out, they cripple the case." Maya set the mug down firmly. "Then we fight smart. But I won't be caged. That's not who I am." Elaine squeezed her daughter's hand, her voice low but resolute. "You do what you need to do, but remember, you're not fighting just for yourself now. You're carrying all of us with you." The hum of the safe house cameras filled the silence that followed. Each tick of the clock carried the weight of a countdown. Somewhere beyond the pines, someone was planning their next move. And Maya knew it was only a matter of time before they tested the defenses. By the third day after the raid, the battle for truth had spilled beyond the courthouse files and evidence lockers. It was now playing out on television screens, radio talk shows, and the front pages of local papers. Maya sat in the safe house living room, her arms crossed as the evening news blared from the small flat screen mounted on the wall. The anchor's voice was measured, but the headline scrolled in bold letters: "Westridge Mayor Condemns FBI Raid." A clip rolled of Mayor Carlton James standing at the steps of City Hall, surrounded by uniformed officers who hadn't yet been placed under federal review. His voice was full of indignation. "Our town stands by its officers," he declared, waving a hand for emphasis. "The FBI has overstepped its authority. These so-called raids are nothing more than a smear campaign against good men and women protecting this community." Elaine shook her head from her chair. "Good men? Protecting?" she muttered. "They terrorized us for years." The feed cut to a round table of national commentators. One of them, a sharp-suited pundit with an unshakable smile, leaned forward. "Let's not ignore the elephant in the room. Lieutenant Maya Washington shows up, and within days the town is under siege by federal agents. Is it possible she exaggerated events? Could she have manipulated her status as a veteran for personal motives?" Maya's jaw tightened. She had expected backlash, but hearing strangers dissect her life with casual detachment still hit her like a slap. Reynolds muted the television. "Spin was inevitable. They'll try to make you the villain, it's textbook. Shift the narrative, turn the community against you." Chen entered with a USB drive, her expression grim. "Then it's time to give them a narrative they can't twist." She plugged the drive into the laptop and hit play. The room filled with the grainy sound of a recording. Brooks' voice came first, calm but cold. "Everybody's got something to hide," he said. Then Cooper's laugh followed, sharp and ugly. "And if they don't? We make sure they do next time you pull them over." Maya felt her stomach knot as the recording continued, casual discussion of planting drugs, of forcing compliance through fear. Brooks again. "Fear's the only leash that works in this town." Elaine closed her eyes, whispering a prayer. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "This is gold. No amount of spin can erase what people hear with their own ears." Maya nodded slowly, her voice low but determined. "Then let's make sure everyone hears it." The safe house grew quiet as the audio replayed, every word etching itself into their resolve. Outside, the night pressed close, thick and restless. The battle for the truth was no longer just about evidence. It was about who controlled the story. And Westridge was about to hear the story in the voices of its own leaders, stripped of all illusion. 4 armed men advanced on the safe house. Maya struck first, alarm triggered. Reynolds fell wounded. The federal courthouse in Atlanta hummed with tension. Reporters clustered on the marble steps outside, their cameras flashing as witnesses filed past security. Inside, the atmosphere shifted from public spectacle to quiet gravity. The grand jury chamber was stark and solemn, paneled wood reflecting the overhead lights. Maya stood in the waiting area, wearing her army dress uniform. The polished buttons gleamed, her ribbons displayed, the purple heart centered proudly on her chest. She had debated whether to wear it, but in the end, she knew this was her battlefield now. The uniform was both armor and truth. When she entered the chamber, the panel of jurors looked up. Some whispered softly to one another, recognizing her from news coverage. Others studied her with guarded curiosity. Maya stood tall at the witness stand, raised her right hand, and swore the oath. The prosecutor began with direct questions: her name, her rank, her service record. She spoke crisply, her voice unwavering. 20 years of service, 3 tours overseas, commendations for valor. The jurors leaned in, taking note. Then came the defense attorney, a tall man in an expensive suit, his voice smooth as he leaned against the podium. "Lieutenant Washington," he began, "we're grateful for your service, but let's be clear. You're not a law enforcement officer, are you?" "No," Maya answered calmly, "I am a military intelligence officer." He smiled faintly. "And in that role, would you say you sometimes have biases, particularly against police officers who don't follow the same chain of command you do?" Maya met his eyes. "Bias is assuming guilt without evidence. What I provided you today is evidence." The defense lawyer shifted. "Yet you resisted arrest, didn't you? The officers claim you reached for a weapon." "I reached for my phone," Maya said, her tone level. "I called my attorney. That's not resisting, that's a constitutional right." Murmurs rippled through the jury box. The attorney pressed harder. "So to be clear, you don't believe local police have authority over you?" Maya's eyes didn't waver. "I believe no one has the authority to violate civil rights. Not police, not military, not anyone." The silence that followed felt heavy, electric. The prosecutor leaned forward, seizing the moment. "Lieutenant, what did Officer Cooper say to you at the time of your arrest?" Maya inhaled. "He said, 'People like you always end up in trouble.'" Her voice dropped, but it carried weight. "And when he stepped on my military photograph, he said, 'Your uniform doesn't make you special here.'" The jurors' faces hardened. Even the defense lawyer shifted uncomfortably. By the time Maya stepped down from the stand, the chamber was silent. She had not just testified, she had dismantled the narrative that sought to paint her as a criminal. The uniform hadn't just shielded her, it had reminded the room what service and integrity truly meant. When the door closed behind her, Reynolds gave her a nod. "You didn't just win them over, you reminded them why we fight." Maya exhaled slowly, the weight of the testimony settling into her bones. She wasn't finished yet, the real battle was still coming. The courthouse lobby was still buzzing when Maya exited the chamber. Reporters shouted questions, their microphones thrust forward, their flashes exploding in bursts of white light. She kept her head high, ignoring the chaos, flanked by federal marshals, but the noise followed her into the street, a storm that refused to die down. By the time she reached the safe house later that night, the air outside carried a heavy stillness. Maya poured herself a glass of water, her hands finally trembling now that the day's ordeal was over. That was when Reynolds entered, his expression unusually guarded. Behind him came a man she didn't recognize. Sleek suit, briefcase in hand, every inch of him radiating polished arrogance. "Lieutenant Washington," he said smoothly, extending a card. "I represent the firm of Benton, Hart and Raines. We've been retained to discuss..." "Resolution." Maya raised an eyebrow, refusing the card. "Resolution?" The lawyer opened his briefcase with deliberate precision and slid a folder across the table. "Our clients are prepared to offer a settlement package, $8 million, immediate transfer, along with a written apology for the mistreatment you endured." Maya didn't touch the folder. "And the condition?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your silence. Complete withdrawal from the federal oversight process. No testimony, no interviews, no advisory role. You retire quietly, live comfortably, and let the system handle itself." Reynolds bristled. "This is obstruction dressed as charity." The lawyer leaned back, unfazed. "Call it what you like, but consider what's at stake for you, Lieutenant. You've sacrificed 20 years already. Don't you want peace? Don't you want security for your mother?" Maya's jaw tightened. Her thoughts flickered to Elaine, scrubbing hateful graffiti from their house, to Jamal's bruised face, to Jerome's weary eyes in that holding cell. then back to Cooper, grinding her photograph into the pavement. She pushed the folder back across the table. "Tell them I said no." The lawyer's smirk faltered. "Are you certain? This is more than most people dream of in a lifetime." Maya leaned forward, her voice sharp as steel. "I didn't spend 20 years serving my country to sell its justice for a paycheck. Tell them I'd rather live broke and free than rich and complicit." Rich, mad, and complicit. The room fell into silence. The lawyer slowly closed his briefcase, eyes narrowing as if memorizing her face. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, then turned and walked out into the night. When the door closed, Reynolds exhaled, shaking his head. "They're desperate. The deeper we dig, the more they realize they can't stop the flood. You just made yourself their biggest threat." Maya met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Then let's give them something worth fearing." The refusal wasn't just a choice, it was a declaration. Jason Miller never saw them coming. He had just parked outside his apartment, the cool night air brushing against his face as he reached for his keys. The first blow struck his ribs, hard and merciless. Two men pinned him while another slammed a fist into his stomach. The last one whispered into his ear, "This is what you get for betraying your brothers." Then they left him bleeding on the concrete. Hours later, Maya stood at his hospital bedside, the sterile scent of antiseptic mixing with the fume of machines. Miller's face was pale, his chest wrapped in bandages, his breath shallow. But when his eyes flickered open, the first thing he saw was her. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, voice cracked but steady. Maya shook her head. "You didn't just protect me. You protected this whole town." She clasped his hand gently, careful not to disturb the IV line. "They tried to break you because you were the only one brave enough to stand inside their circle. Don't ever think that sacrifice was wasted." Miller's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Worth it," he whispered, before the medication pulled him back into sleep. Back at the temporary FBI command post inside Westridge PD, Chen hunched over her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The tension in the room was heavy as she cracked the final layer of encryption on Brooks's private server. A progress bar inched forward, then blinked green. Files cascaded across the screen. "What do we have?" Reynolds asked, leaning over her shoulder. Chen's face hardened. "Everything. Financial ledgers, encrypted emails, off-book meeting notes." She clicked open a folder labeled Community Relations. Inside were scanned lists with names. Each one came with addresses, ages, military service records. At the top of one list were the words "high-risk targets." Maya leaned in, her pulse quickening. The names weren't criminals. They were community leaders, pastors, small business owners, and veterans. Dozens of Black and Latino veterans across Georgia. She spotted her own name, recently added in bold. They weren't just profiling, Shen said grimly. They were hunting influence, anyone who could challenge their control. Another folder revealed correspondence between Brooks and known militia contacts. Plans for partnerships, photos of rallies, strategies for intimidation. It was worse than corruption. It was collusion with extremist groups. Reynolds slammed his fist lightly against the desk. "This ties Westridge to every county we suspected. This isn't just about one town. This is systemic rot." The next morning, the Department of Justice held a press conference. Cameras flashed as the Deputy Attorney General stepped to the podium, flanked by federal officials. Based on evidence seized from Westridge, this investigation now extends to 6 counties. What we've uncovered is not isolated misconduct. It is an organized, systemic effort to undermine civil rights through abuse of authority, and it ends now. Maya stood in the crowd, uniform gleaming, knowing the fight was far from over. Maya sat in the converted conference room that now served as the FBI's coordination hub in Atlanta. A corkboard spanned the length of one wall, plastered with evidence: bank statements, mugshots, militia correspondence, and lists of targeted veterans. Her name still stared back at her in bold type, and each time her eyes landed on it, her resolve hardened. Colonel James Hernandez entered quietly, carrying a heavy brown folder marked "Declassified." His posture was as straight as the day she first reported under him, but his expression carried the gravity of someone about to open old wounds. "Lieutenant," he greeted softly. He placed the folder on the table and slid it toward her. "This came through clearance this morning. It's time you see the rest." Maya hesitated before opening it. Inside were mission briefs, surveillance photos, and coded financial trails from her last deployment in South America, the Caracas operation. She remembered the months of tense nights, following wire transfers that seemed to vanish into the ether. She had reported anomalies, funds that left cartel accounts only to reappear in small-town American institutions. At the time, it felt too strange to be true. Hernandez tapped a photo of a warehouse in Caracas. "You tracked millions moving through here. What you couldn't see then was where it landed. Now we know. It came straight into accounts tied to Westridge PD and surrounding jurisdictions." Maya flipped through page after page. The names leapt out at her. Business owners she'd seen in her childhood, politicians she'd once believed were untouchable, pillars of the state. "So I wasn't chasing shadows," she whispered. "I was chasing home." Hernandez nodded. "Without knowing it, you've been on this case for years. Your military intelligence was one side of the coin. The FBI's domestic investigation was the other. Together, they form the full picture." Reynolds leaned against the wall, arms folded. "And now you understand why they moved so quickly to silence you. They recognized your name. You weren't just a threat as a veteran. They knew you were the one person who could connect these dots." Maya exhaled, the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. "All this time, I thought I left the battlefield overseas, but it was waiting here the whole time." Hernandez placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes the longest wars aren't fought abroad. They're fought in the very streets we call home." Maya stared again at the board, her eyes tracing the lines that connected Caracas to Westridge and Westridge to half a dozen counties. The corruption wasn't just systemic, it was orchestrated. And she was standing at the heart of it. "This is it," she said finally, "the root of it all." The public hearings drew crowds that spilled into the courthouse steps, their voices mixing into a low hum of anticipation. Rows of cameras lined the back wall of the chamber, capturing every second for a nation suddenly riveted by the scandal in Westridge. For decades, whispers of misconduct had drifted through black neighborhoods. But now, under oath and before the eyes of millions, the truth was being spoken aloud. Jerome was the first to take the stand. The older man carried himself with quiet dignity, his salt and pepper hair combed neatly, his eyes steady despite the weight of years of pain behind them. His voice was low but unwavering. "They used the law as a weapon," he said, "not to protect us, but to keep us afraid." He recounted stories of being pulled over 3 times in a single week, of trumped-up charges that drained his savings, of watching neighbors lose homes and businesses because of civil forfeiture that never added up. Each word landed heavy, not just as testimony but as memory, carved into the lives of those who had endured it. Jurors shifted in their seats, shaken by the sheer normalcy of the abuse he described. Next came Jamal. He still bore faint scars on his face from the attack weeks earlier, but he walked in with his head high. "I'm 23, he began, his voice strong but tinged with raw emotion. "And in my lifetime, I've never known this town without fear. My grandmother warned me to keep my head down, not to talk back, not to expect fairness. Because here, black boys don't get second chances." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "But we're here today because someone finally said enough. Lieutenant Washington didn't just stand for herself. She stood for every one of us who grew up knowing we were targets. The room grew still. Even the defense attorneys avoided meeting his eyes. Then it was Maya's turn. She walked to the stand in uniform once more, every medal glinting under the lights. Her voice carried the weight of both soldier and citizen. She described her arrest, the planted evidence, the deliberate attempt to erase her service with one boot pressed into her photograph. "I wore this uniform overseas to protect freedoms we hold sacred," she said firmly. "And when I came home, I learned that those freedoms had been stripped from my own neighbors by people who swore an oath to uphold them." The words reverberated beyond the courtroom. By evening, headlines across the nation carried her testimony. "Lieutenant Washington. They used the law as a weapon." Commentators replayed the phrase, comparing it to civil rights testimony from generations past. For the first time, Westridge wasn't just a local scandal, it had become a symbol. Elaine watched from the gallery, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When Maya stepped down, their eyes met, and her mother nodded, a silent message of pride and shared purpose. Outside, the crowd erupted into chants, "Justice, justice, justice," echoing against the courthouse walls. The truth had finally been spoken, and there was no taking it back. The indictments came like thunder. Judges, officers, and business owners found their names inked on federal warrants. Entire networks unraveled in days. "This wasn't corruption," Reynolds said grimly. "It was a syndicate." But as the charges spread, so did desperation. Hard drives were wiped, files destroyed, and 2 suspects fled the state. One was later found dead in a motel room, a single gunshot wound silencing what could have been key testimony. The message was clear. This network protected itself through fear. Cutting one head only made the others retreat deeper into the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. The night was warm, the air carrying the faint scent of magnolia as hundreds gathered outside the Westridge police station. The building was no longer a fortress of intimidation. Yellow FBI tape still marked its doors, but now the steps were covered with candles. Their flickering light painted the crowd in soft gold, shadows swaying as hymns and murmurs of prayer filled the silence between speeches. Maya stood near the center, her mother Elaine at her side in her wheelchair. Jerome was there too, holding a candle, his hand steady despite all he had endured. Jamal leaned on crutches, his grandmother beside him. Families arrived together, some carrying posters of loved ones who had been wrongfully jailed. Others carried photos of empty chairs, fathers and sons lost to a system that had branded them guilty long before any trial. The candles formed a river of light across the lawn, each flame a testament to resistance. When Maya stepped forward, the crowd grew quiet. She looked out and saw the faces of her childhood, neighbors who once kept their heads down now standing tall. "This isn't just about me," she began, her voice carrying steady into the night. "It's about decades of silence, of pain hidden in plain sight. Tonight we say that silence ends here." Elaine reached for her daughter's hand, her voice low but meant for all to hear. "You came home for me," she whispered, eyes shining with pride, "but maybe it was for all of us." The words rippled through Maya's chest like a second heartbeat. She squeezed her mother's hand, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Around them, the crowd raised their candles higher, voices rising in unison. For the first time in generations, the people of Westridge stood not in fear, but in light. The Westridge Police Department was unrecognizable. A year earlier, its walls had reeked of corruption, its offices lined with men who thrived on intimidation and silence. Now, under federal receivership, the building had been stripped bare and rebuilt from the inside out. Gone were the hidden file cabinets and shadowy corners. New servers, new policies, new oversight measures. Every trace of secrecy had been forced into the light. Maya walked the halls slowly, taking in the transformation. What had once been a hostile space now hummed with cautious renewal. Federal monitors occupied former offices, carefully documenting every decision. The reception area that once processed false arrests had been turned into an open community desk where residents could file complaints or request assistance. Transparency had become the new currency. Reynolds walked beside her, his steps measured, his tone reflective. "Receivership is never easy," he said. "You tear down what's rotten, but people are still suspicious. They don't trust new paint until they see the foundation is different." He frowned. Maya nodded. "Trust isn't built by words, it's built by consistency." That afternoon, the Department of Justice gathered a group of leaders in what used to be the chief's office. The walls had been repainted, the heavy mahogany desk replaced with a round conference table. Maya sat across from Chen, Reynolds, and two federal administrators tasked with the transition. "We want you on the reform committee," one of the administrators said, folding her hands. "Your experience as both a veteran and a victim gives you a unique perspective. You know what leadership looks like, and you know what abuse feels like. That balance is exactly what this department needs." Maya hesitated. She had planned to retire from the military, to care for her mother, to step away from battlefields. But as she looked around the table, she realized that Westridge itself was the battlefield now. She drew in a deep breath. "I'll serve, but only if this isn't just paperwork. If we're serious about systemic change, then the community needs a seat at this table. This can't just be federal oversight. It has to be local accountability." Chen smiled faintly. "Then that's where we begin." The decision spread quickly through Westridge. Some welcomed it with relief, others with skepticism, but the tide of change was undeniable. For the first time, the very department that had once terrorized the town was being reshaped by the people it had harmed. And Maya knew this was just the start. The first meetings of the Reform Committee stretched long into the night. The conference table was crowded with voices that had never been welcome inside the department before. Pastors, teachers, small business owners, and even high school students. For decades, the police had made decisions behind closed doors. Now, those same doors had been thrown open. Maya listened as Jerome leaned forward, his voice rough but steady. "You can put new names on the building, but if the policies don't change, it won't mean a thing. We need to see it in black and white, rules that hold officers accountable." So they began drafting. Use of force restrictions topped the list, written in plain language so there would be no loopholes. Chokeholds were banned outright. Firearms could only be drawn in the face of immediate lethal threat, and every incident, no matter how small, would be reviewed by a board that included community members. Next came the mandate for body cameras. Maya insisted there be no exceptions. "If the camera isn't on, the officer isn't on duty," she said firmly. Some former officers groaned, but the committee stood united. Transparency had to be more than a slogan, it had to be practice. Then came the boldest step, establishing a permanent community review board with binding authority. It wasn't advisory, it wasn't symbolic. The board could recommend discipline, demand investigations, and even block promotions if integrity was in question. It was a revolution in Westridge policing. Chen presented the final draft of policies at a town hall meeting held in the community center gym. Rows of folding chairs were packed, and for once, the air wasn't thick with fear but with possibility. Chen read aloud the reforms, and each one drew murmurs, then applause. When she announced the creation of the Community Review Board, the room erupted in cheers. Elaine sat in the front row, her walker beside her. She turned to the neighbor seated next to her and whispered proudly, "Justice is loud now, and it's about time." Maya stood at the back of the room, watching as people who had once only whispered complaints in private now shouted their approval openly. This was the sound of change, not in courtrooms or press conferences, but in the very heartbeat of the community. For the first time, the department was not dictating to the people were dictating to the department. And for Maya, that shift meant everything. Training the next generation became the committee's most critical task. Maya and Jason Miller, still walking with a cane after the attack, worked side by side to design an ethics curriculum unlike anything Westridge had seen before. The old academy had focused on control, tactics, and intimidation. Their new program centered on cultural competency, trauma awareness, and accountability. Maya stood before a group of nervous recruits in the training hall, her uniform sharp, her voice steady. "Policing isn't about power," she said. "It's about responsibility. Every decision you make carries weight. Every mistake leaves scars. If you're here to wield authority, leave now. If you're here to serve with integrity, stay." Miller followed with his own testimony. "I saw what corruption does on the inside. It poisons everything. Don't ever think silence makes you safe. It only makes you complicit. Speak up. Speak early. Protect your community, not your badge." The recruits listened intently, many scribbling notes, others watching with quiet awe. For the first time, the future of Westridge law enforcement was being shaped not by fear, but by truth. Maya looked at them and saw something she hadn't in years: hope. The resistance that had once thundered through Westridge began to fade under the weight of indictments and reforms. The mayor himself, Carlton James, was finally brought before a federal judge on charges of obstruction and conspiracy. When the news broke, the town exhaled, as if an old ghost had finally been banished. The power structures that had once shielded corruption were collapsing one by one. In the weeks that followed, community meetings became gatherings of cautious optimism. People no longer came to whisper grievances, they came to plan the future. Elaine spoke at one of these meetings, her frail voice carrying through the crowded gymnasium with surprising force. "For too long, justice was quiet in this town," she said, leaning lightly on her walker. "It was silenced in courtrooms, erased in police files, buried in fear. But justice is loud now, and it's our duty to keep it loud." The applause was thunderous, and for Maya, it was the sound of healing. The culmination came months later, at the graduation ceremony of the new Westridge Police Academy class. The recruits stood tall in freshly pressed uniforms, the air buzzing with a mixture of nerves and pride. Maya stepped to the podium, her eyes sweeping the crowd. Families, community leaders, former skeptics, and survivors of past abuses. "We don't choose our missions," she began, her voice strong and steady. "They choose us. I didn't come home to rebuild a police department. I came home to care for my mother, but the mission found me. And now it finds you. You will not wear this badge as a shield from accountability. You will wear it as a promise to every child, every elder, every neighbor, that justice in Westridge belongs to all." The recruits raised their right hands, repeating the oath in unison. For the first time in generations, the promise rang true. 1 year later, Westridge looked like a different town. The scars of corruption still lingered, but something had shifted in the marrow of the place. Patrol cars that once prowled like predators now moved through neighborhoods with windows rolled down, officers waving to children instead of questioning them. Mothers felt safe letting their kids play in front yards, no longer pulling them inside at the sight of flashing lights. The sound of laughter had returned to streets once hushed by fear. The veterans' mural, which had been faded and scarred with graffiti, now stood restored in vivid color. It stretched proudly across the side of the community center, showing the faces of men and women who had served, from the world wars to Iraq and Afghanistan. Maya's own likeness had been added quietly in the corner, painted in uniform beside her Purple Heart. She hadn't asked for it, but every time she passed, she saw children stopping to point, their parents whispering the story of the soldier who stood up when no one else could. The community centers themselves were alive again. Basketball courts rang with bouncing balls, classrooms buzzed with after-school programs, and kitchens hosted free meals for families still finding their footing. Federal grants had poured in, but the real engine was local. Neighbors volunteered time and money. Retired teachers tutored kids. Churches opened spaces for recovery programs. It wasn't charity, it was ownership. Westridge was rebuilding itself. Maya sometimes drove the streets in an unmarked vehicle, simply to watch. She remembered the same roads lined with suspicion, every stop sign an excuse for harassment. Now she saw Officer Tiana Jackson leaning against her cruiser, laughing with a group of teenagers. She saw Officer Lewis, a recruit from the first reform class, helping an elderly woman carry groceries. These small moments weren't headlines, but they were victories. At the station, transparency had become habit. Every arrest, every stop, every complaint went straight to the community review board. Officers knew their actions would be examined, not covered up. The fear of oversight that once made them defensive had given way to pride. The good ones thrived, the corrupt ones had long since been weeded out. Maya felt the change most during town events. A year ago, crowds had gathered only to protest. Now they came together for celebrations. At the Independence Day parade, children carried flags without fear of being shoved aside by officers. Veterans walked proudly, cheered on instead of ignored. When the police band played, people didn't turn their backs, they clapped along. Change wasn't perfect. There were still skeptics, still shadows of the old guard. But the difference was undeniable. Westridge had been a warning once. Now it was a model. And for Maya, every small sign mattered. Because she knew that legacies weren't carved in monuments, they were built in the ordinary, everyday choices that shaped a community. The evening sun sank low, pouring amber light across the porch of Elaine Washington's modest home. The wooden boards creaked as Maya stepped outside, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. Her uniform jacket was folded neatly on the railing. Tonight she was simply a daughter sitting with her mother, not the interim chief or the decorated veteran. Elaine smiled faintly as Maya handed her the tea. She was thinner now, her health fragile, but her eyes still burned with the same quiet fire that had carried her through decades of hardship. She leaned back in her chair, the lines on her face softened by the glow of sunset. For a long moment they sat in silence, listening to the cicadas sing in the trees and the distant hum of voices drifting from the neighborhood. Families were out walking, kids riding bikes, neighbors greeting each other without the heaviness that once clung to every interaction. Elaine nodded toward the street, where a patrol car cruised slowly by. Instead of tension, it drew waves from the children. The officer leaned out the window, calling greetings. The car rolled on, leaving behind laughter, not fear. "You see that?" Elaine murmured, her voice raspy but strong. "That's something I never thought I'd live to see in this town." Maya followed her gaze. "A year ago, that same sight would have made you pull me inside." Elaine chuckled softly, shaking her head. "And I did. More times than I can count. Back then, flashing lights meant trouble for folks like us. But look at them now." She paused, turning her eyes back to Maya. "That's you, baby. That's your work." Maya shook her head quickly. "It's not just me. It's everyone who stood up. Jerome, Jamal, Reynolds, Chen, Miller, even the people who came forward when it was dangerous to speak." Elaine reached for her daughter's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Maybe so, but it started with you. You came home to care for me, but you ended up saving us all." The words pierced Maya deeper than any medal or commendation she had ever received. For years she had fought battles overseas, convinced her duty was to protect strangers on foreign soil. Yet here, on her mother's porch, she realized her most important mission had always been at home. Maya squeezed her mother's hand gently. "I didn't save anyone, Mama. I just refused to let them break us." Elaine studied her for a moment, then smiled knowingly. "And that's exactly why you did." The sky deepened into shades of purple and gold. The town bathed in twilight peace. For the first time in decades, Westridge wasn't just surviving. It was healing. And for Maya, sharing that quiet moment with her mother was proof that her fight had never been in vain. The interview was set beneath the old oak tree in front of the community center. A reporter from a national network leaned forward, recorder balanced on her knee, eyes intent on Maya. You've been called many things over this past year: victim, soldier, whistleblower, chief. But tell me, what changed you the most? Maya thought for a long moment, the sounds of children playing in the background. I didn't change, she said finally. We did. This community did. That's the point. When I was arrested, I was just one voice. But when others spoke, when they stood with me, it became impossible to silence. That's what changed. Later, she walked through the streets of Westridge, seeing the future unfold in real time. Jamal, once just a young man beaten for speaking truth, now mentored a group of teenagers at the youth center. His scars turned into testimony. Jerome, the elder who once feared every flashing light, chaired the community oversight board, his gavel steady as he guided meetings that held officers accountable. A patrol car rolled slowly past, and Officer Tiana Jackson leaned out, waving with a grin. "Evening, Chief," she called, before turning back to chat with a group of kids. Maya smiled, heart heavy with gratitude. The cycle had broken. Maya placed her military badge beside her new one on the desk. "True justice isn't revenge," she whispered. "It's restoration." The weight of both symbols felt eternal.